I have just finished binge watching Black Mirror Season 4 on Netflix, and I don't usually talk about TV shows, but I think I have to make a special exception here because this series is absolutely fantastic and also very, very disturbing, and I do like TV series that make me think and make me question whether or not we're going in the right direction. For those of you unaware, Black Mirror is a series based around the potential horrors of where technology is going. And there's always been the technological element, but here it's present in every single episode in some form. And it might take something like virtual reality or online dating and then show you the absolute worst of what it can be, or just show you the deepest concepts behind what it can be. Often when a show is trying to be as high concept and as intricate as this, it can often fall flat. I often point towards Doctor Who episodes written by Stephen Moffat as something that can be crushed under the weight of its own ambition when it's not executed correctly. But in Black Mirror, they, I think without fail, always deliver on their high concepts. You start to see similarities after a while, but that's to be expected. We're on the full season now, and considering they're trying to make each episode distinct, again, it's somewhat understandable, but even still, I consider it to be one of the most unique TV series that you can see. The tone is generally dark, although there is at least one episode that is primarily feel-good, although there are some emotional twists and turns. It starts off with a fantastic episode with a strange link to Star Trek, and ends with one episode that is so dark that I was really struggling to watch it at one point. So this is something that has massively varying themes, and I have to say the writers and the directors and the film crew behind this series, I think particularly the creative team, are just on another level. I've not seen anything quite like this other than admittedly other Black Mirror seasons. And if you want me to just say, is Black Mirror better than previous seasons now with season 4? I'd say it's about on par. When we got to season 3, there was this massive production value jump because it moved to Netflix and clearly there was a lot more funding behind it. So we're continuing with that. We've got 6 very long episodes. They vary slightly from an hour, so I think 41 minutes being the shortest one. And yeah, the production values, as we've come to expect from Netflix programming now, is always just top notch. You know, this is why I don't tend to watch conventional TV so much anymore, because there's just so much good original stuff online now. Although it's interesting to think that Black Mirror originally came just from the humble beginnings of Channel 4 and was not as well known outside of the UK, but of course this Netflix prominence has given it a more global appeal. And now I'm going to have to talk about spoilers, because if I don't, I simply can't touch on the more intricate elements of this, and we'll go through each episode and describe my general feelings. In some ways, this was the review I've just done here. Now we're going into a general discussion, and feel free to listen if you want, but I would recommend watching the episodes first. And at the end, I'll even rank them. So it begins with the USS Callister, where a technological director in a company feels shunned by his partner, he's laughed at by his employees, and he's not very confident in real life. So he uses his infinity virtual world, his game system, to create a special bubble, a development studio, where he can assimilate people into it so that there's a digital version of them, and he needs to get their DNA to do this. And this means that he can be effectively God in his mini-universe, and he rules over these people with an iron fist. And there's this stark contrast between his behaviour in real life, where he's very nervous, lacks confidence, and doesn't look too great, to be honest. And then you look at his self inside of the virtual reality, the Star Trek parody, which is Starfleet, where he's very confident because he is capable of doing seemingly anything. He can transform people into stuff. You know, one of the threats he ensues on one of the people he assimilates is just to take their face away so they can't see and they can't breathe, but they can't die, so they're just in this blind, breathless world, which is a really horrific thing to think about. He can also transform people into these space bugs, which is another horrific thought. So the people he assimilates into this, they're not literally the person being pulled out of reality and into this. It's a different version of them. So their real version still exists, but you have their digital version. And they think that they are them, and he can effectively do what he wants with them, which creates this really nasty idea of being trapped in a prison. There's no escape, and the jailer can do what he wants with you, and you have to go along with his whole Star Trek fantasy, or he's going to do horrible, unimaginably painful things to you. He can rip you into pieces and put you into little jars if he wants while you're still alive. This, the horrific idea that he can do anything is almost worse than seeing it, although that woman being turned into a giant bug was pretty disgusting. But then they managed to thwart him by distracting him in real life by blackmailing one of the digital selves' real self, so that she calls for a pizza, and then she snatches the DNA that he uses to put them into the digital world, and they manage to then take that time to escape. And this is the one thing that I considered a bit of a plot hole, unless I missed something, is that he decides to chase after them with a spaceship rather than just teleporting. I assumed that because he was so omnipotent in this world, he could just teleport. And if he couldn't teleport, why didn't they previously just beam him down to any planet and leave him there, if the proximity was a factor that had to be considered? Maybe that's something I missed, because I know there are lots of little details that come up, but that's the only thing, was I didn't know why he was chasing them. I thought he could just either teleport to them, or he could just snap his fingers and the ship would be somewhere else. Other than that, though, I thought it was a fantastic episode. Maybe you could say that because the entire simulation was destabilizing, he was unable to modify anything. Maybe that was something that I missed. But this was one of my favourite episodes from a fun point of view. Although it had its disturbing elements, the whole concept was so bright and creative that I think I'm going to be rewatching it a few times. I would say that this is the most rewatchable episode. The Black Mirror factor, if you want to call it that, is the question I would then ask myself, or rather what the viewer is asking themselves. So if you were in the situation where you had a virtual world and you could put someone in there that you really despised, that you absolutely hated, and you could torment them without any fear of repercussion whatsoever, no moral condemnation because no one knows you're doing it, would you do it? If you could maybe not go to the same extent that this guy did, where he chucked his enemy's son out of an airlock. That's pretty messed up, and I don't think I'd ever do that to anyone. But if you could at least, take your school bully, for example, and put him in a world where you can just punch him in the face a few times, would you do that? Then we move over to Archangel, which is a much less ambitious idea, but powerful nonetheless, where a chip is devised where you can put it into someone and then you can see everything they see. You can blot out things that might make them afraid, so if you see danger, they won't be able to perceive it. And you can also track them, though that's something you can do in real life with iPhones if you want. But the ability to see through their eyes at all time is quite a freaky concept. And the mother, who is overprotective of her child, uses this to notice that her boyfriend is encouraging her to... Well, no, sorry, it was the girlfriend who actually wanted to take drugs, and she catches her doing that and she blames the boyfriend, so she confronts him, but then she finds out about it and then she's pregnant. It's a big, complicated system, and it's a very relationship driven episode, and also it kind of highlights the power of surveillance and how it can end up backfiring if you overuse it. This wasn't necessarily my favourite episode just because the themes weren't something that resonated with me, but in terms of the character performances, they were very strong. You felt the mother's paranoia, you felt that the daughter was a good character, but she was certainly flawed because, again, she was the one who encouraged the boyfriend to let her take drugs, although the boyfriend also was dealing with drugs anyway, so no one was really in the clear here, which again is kind of a consistent theme across a lot of these episodes, where you think there's a bad guy, but really they're all bad in their own way. And I guess for this one, the question that the audience would ask themselves here is, if there was someone that you cared about so much that you couldn't bear the idea of them ever coming to harm, would you spy on them? Would you look through their eyes to see where they are? This isn't one that I think I have anyone that I have any desire to do this to, and I can't really think of a reason, but I guess if maybe you're a mother, I think this is an episode that will speak to mothers more than it will speak to anyone else, because that protective instinct is really the core tenet of the episode, then abstracted through technology. So I think, although I didn't necessarily enjoy it too much, if there are any mothers watching this, I think they'll maybe enjoy the themes and difficulties and maybe understand more so than someone like I do. Then there's Crocodile, which is just depressing, where it's one person's choice to cover up an accident that causes this ripple effect down the line. At the beginning of the episode, a driver and his wife are going down the road drunk, and the driver knocks the guy over his bonnet. He is killed in the process, and then the two reluctantly agree to throw the body in the river so it drifts away. Years later, the driver wants to repent, but the wife won't have it, so she kills him, and then she gets wrapped up into this other thing where she's a witness to an entirely separate crime. But because the technology in this episode is that you can see through people's memories, she manages to get incriminated for her crime of killing her husband and of being party to the death of the guy in the car crash, that she ends up being compromised for a crime that she wasn't involved in, and then has to kill someone else. And it all spirals into the situation where she's going through killing loads of people just to kill all the potential witnesses. There's even a very disturbing bit where she kills a child because the child may not be able to physically speak about what it's seen, but the authorities can use the memory reader to see what the baby's seen, so the baby can be used as a witness even if it can't speak. We do later learn that the baby was born blind, but of course she had no real way of knowing that, so she would just see it as a threat anyway. And she kills the baby, which is horrific, but she forgets one thing, and it's only hinted at towards the end, it isn't directly shown, is that there is a guinea pig, I think, in the room, or a hamster, you know, something like that. And it's implied that they're taking that away, and they're going to put a memory reader on that, and I guess there's no reason you couldn't read its mind because it's purely a visual reader. So you're reading its memories, so she would be incriminated because the gerbil or the hamster, whatever it was, has seen her. I thought this episode was a little bit weak until those final twists, because I think some of the characters just weren't that standout. It's just very, very grim. This poor woman who, she made a bad choice in killing her husband to try and cover up the situation that had happened before, but that wasn't even her fault. She wanted to do the right thing at the time, so it's another case yet again of there being no true bad guy. You could say the original driver was the issue, but then he came back and wanted to take himself in, but the wife didn't deserve to be taken down with him, so you can kind of get that as well. So it's hard to point at the worst person in this scenario. There were definitely innocent people, like the investigator who was just doing her job, and you know, her husband and her baby, but between the wife and the husband originally, the driver, it's hard to pinpoint who is the worst person there. And then there's Hang the DJ, which is the most feel-good, I mean, it's not even depressing, it's crazy, it's a Black Mirror episode that's not depressing. So there's this new version of Tinder, or dating app, that people can use that matches people, and it runs a simulation to see how compatible people are. And this entire episode is about creating a visual abstraction of what exactly is meant by that simulation. So in the simulation you have the two people who are trying to be compatible over and over again, getting put through this scenario designed to test their strength of their love, which is kind of nice in a way. And the idea is to see how frequently their love is so strong that they want to break out of the system, and it's just called the system. And it's like this system where they believe, within the programming, that they are being put with a series of random strangers, and one of those strangers is the person they want to be made compatible with. And if they decide that they love that person enough, and then they decide to rebel against the system itself and climb out of it, I guess, they literally climb out a wall, then it determines that in real life they are made for each other. This one is quite nice just because it's like a break. You've just watched 3 episodes that are pretty dire, pretty disturbing and depressing, and this one has a happy ending because the end result is that although the simulation is running and there is certainly heartbreak and turmoil happen within the program, eventually they do see each other in the bar and they seem to be walking towards each other, and it's like, yeah, they love each other, fantastic. And it's, you know, I think the actor and the actress in this, who were the main couple, did a great job. You know, you really did feel their connection there, and it's not something that I normally overly appreciate within stuff. Maybe it's just not my kind of cup of tea, but here I did really feel it, and I think if I can feel it, then that really has to speak to its poignancy. And then we get to Metalhead. Ooh, Metalhead. This one is shot entirely in black and white, and it's like a horror film more so than any of the others in a traditional sense, in that essentially you have a woman running away from a robot dog of sorts. So in this episode, the technology is not really explained, it's just shown that it appears that something has gone horribly wrong. It could have been aliens, it could have been machines that man created that went wrong, but whatever the idea and the creation and the origin was here, the result is there are now evil robot dogs. That's the problem. And this woman and her band of merry men go into this warehouse to go and try and get, I think it was a teddy bear or a teddy monkey for a little boy who's in pain. Although you don't know that it's a cuddly toy at the beginning, that's only revealed at the end. But when they're going to get it, they pull down the crate and there's this metal head thing. And you think, oh, what's that? That looks a bit strange. But then it proceeds to start killing them all. It's got some kind of shotgun in its arm. It can fire tracking missiles out. That's the tracking missile thing is the Black Mirror part of this. The twist part is that at the end she's having a showdown with the robot dog, which, you know, it's crazy how intimidating it is considering how small it was. But she's having the showdown, and although she does manage to kill it, just before it dies, it fires off its tracking missiles, and one of them pierces into her neck. So although she has previously managed to get the tracking scraps, the tracking shards out, she can't take the one out her neck without causing herself to bleed out. So it's like a final kamikaze for the dog, and you see all these robot dogs then swarming around her. Well, not around her, just swarming the general area. Because presumably they've found the trackers, although, again, she's probably killed herself. This one probably has the most simple concept, because it is a robot dog chasing a woman, and then she kills it, but it sends out a tracker, and then she has to kill herself. It's the easiest one to explain, at least, but it's hard to imagine seeing something like this in anything other than a Doctor Who episode, or maybe like Rick and Morty, something where it's so specific that you couldn't find it anywhere else. It's not very Black Mirror because it's just so based on the visuals and the horror element to it. And the black and white, I'm not sure exactly why they chose black and white, but it works for it. Maybe it was to make the dog look more realistic and more foreboding. Maybe it was to harken back to older horror films. But yeah, it's an interesting episode for sure. It's the shortest one as well, which I think works because it's got the least to work with. And it was one of my favourites. So yeah, Metalhead, great episode. Also, there was the Black Museum at the end. Whew, this one really unsettled me, because this one is essentially 3 stories, with the final one tying into the overall situation. But it also suggests that these episodes may, in a very loose sense, be interconnected, because there's a bit where you see the assimilator from episode 1 in a cabinet that the museum curator has gathered. So the whole idea here is that there's this museum, and there are all these technological wonders, or horrendous wonders, and there's this pretty mad owner of the museum who's gathered them, who previously worked for a company that developed the technologies, or has just, I guess, procured them in some cases. And I don't know if anyone else would agree with this, but particularly towards the end of the episode, he was really reminding me of Heath Ledger's Joker in terms of what he was saying and how he was saying it. Even the voice was very similar. So I quite liked that. It was, I wonder if that was intentional or not, but it really worked. He came across as super menacing towards the end. He starts off as just very quirky and a bit strange, to this guy is a monster. So there are 3 parts to this episode. The first one is the most disturbing thing in this entire season, to me at least, just because conceptually it turns my stomach. There's a doctor who has a implant put into his brain that allows him to feel, he can feel pain at first. So he uses this to diagnose illnesses because he can just feel what the patient is feeling, so he can detect it based on that. But then something goes wrong with the implant and it reverses it. So where he feels pain, he then gets pleasure for it. So it's like the opposite. So the more pain inflicted, the more pleasure he receives. And yeah, that really turns my stomach, I have to say. And it gets to a real extreme measure where he's like gets hooked on it like a drug. And he's even inflicting pain on himself just to feel the pleasure. Oh, it's just, yeah, even describing it now, it's not so much the visuals that I don't like, it's the actual concept of it. Of all the things that are in this entire season of Black Mirror, in fact in Black Mirror in general, for some reason this particularly turned my stomach. But again, I couldn't stop watching it. There was one bit where I was like, I'm just going to take a quick break, but I was kind of like, I do want to keep watching and I don't, but I went back to it obviously to go through. So yeah, whoever thought of that, you are a particularly messed up human being, whoever thought of that idea. But it was at least somewhat entertaining to watch. Then you move on to the next bit, which is a little bit easier to digest, to watch, more of a psychological thing, where if a person goes into a coma, their conscience can be taken out and placed into the brain of someone else, so they can experience what that person's experienced and they can commentate to that person. And this happens where a wife is put into their husband's mind and she experiences their life. So at first it seems great because my wife's not dead, I can hear her and she can see life again, but it gets to a point where because they're always together, they start to get really annoyed about that. And God, it gets quite complicated, but long story short, she ends up in a monkey. So then there's the final part where you have the museum guy who's got this technology where just before someone dies, he can extract their consciousness and hold it as a piece of data. And he decides to do it for this guy who's on death row and who gets electrocuted. And he puts him in a cell so that people can come to the museum and electrocute him over and over again. Now, this is something I wasn't entirely on board with, simply because I don't think that so many people would be so messed up in the head as to enjoy it. I got it when the sick people came along and started doing it, like the real messed up people who enjoyed doing that. But when there was like average people electrocuting the guy and liking it, even if he was a criminal, I didn't quite buy that. It implied everyone was as bad as him. Yeah, that was another messed up bit, and the museum owner himself ends up getting put in the system because it turns out the woman he's showing around the museum is the daughter of the guy he's captured, and she revenge captures him. It's just so complicated, I have to kind of sum it up as quick as I can. That is one thing I can say about some of these episodes. They are super complicated. But it was like for this final act of the entire season, they just thought, okay, how do we make the most disturbing mental hell we can possibly think of and have the most maniacal monster deliver the concept to us? So it was like an all-out psychopath fun at the end there. Black Mirror is an interesting one when it comes to a recommendation. In terms of creativity, it cannot be denied. It is impressive on a level that few TV shows manage to achieve. It has a diversity in terms of its creativity as well, so it's not just a base concept that gets repeated. It is different in different episodes, but it is at the same time at points quite disturbing. And although I can enjoy that, and I always have done with Black Mirror, I find that quite cathartic in a way. It won't be for everyone, but I absolutely recommend giving it a try. I think the first episode is a good way of testing your ability to enjoy this program, because episode 1 is a little bit disturbing, but it's really just in the psychological elements, unless you consider that bit where the woman gets turned into a bug to be scarring you. But yeah, if that's too much for you, probably don't go on. But if you can enjoy that and appreciate it, you might be ready for episode 6, which I do consider to be the most disturbing thing this particular season has to offer, though your mileage may vary depending on what you find to be particularly sensitive. I mean, Crocodile does have a rather harrowing idea of a woman bludgeoning a poor baby to death, but I think for whatever reason the start of episode 6 was just crazy. Which is weird because it's almost told in a tongue-in-cheek style, right? It's not told in this really dark narrative that Crocodile is, but yeah, the concept to me was just like, oh dear. So I said I was going to rank them, and I'm going to have a hard time doing this, but I'll just do it quickly. I've already said what I liked about them, so I'll rattle this off. Top 1 is Metalhead, then it's Hang the DJ. I was a bit of a sucker for this one, I have to say. Then it's the USS Callister, then the Black Museum, then Crocodile, and finally Archangel. Thank you very much for listening, and see you next time.